Yes. I had the great privilege to do that with the paintings, drawings, and prints collection in the BC Archives. When I was a student, a university student in the summer, I was given a job to do an inventory of that collection. And I spent the whole summer in a room that had no view. It had no windows. It was below sea level. It was a vault. And I started by pulling out one rack and looking at the paintings on it, taking a painting off, turning it over, and putting a stamp on the back, number one, and writing down all the information that was visible, either signatures and dates, inscriptions, notes on the back, and doing a little paper catalog card and then going to the next one, number two, number three. At the end of the summer, I had 3,000 works of art. Well, I think it all stems back from that first summer and subsequent summers and my early career at the archives is needing to flesh out the information on who these artists were. In some cases, all you had was a monogram or initials on a painting, and you had to try and figure out who the artist might be, and then it was a name that you'd never heard of. So again, you'd have to go into the collections and try and flesh out information. And it was that chasing down of information that hooked me. And so yes, there's a huge collection of Emily Carr works in the BC Archives, and also a fairly large collection of Sophie Pemberton. So between the two artists, uh, I was able to see these works and keep them in the back of my mind for research another time. Having a gallery called the Emily Carr Gallery, which was at 1107 Wharf Street in Victoria. And it was a gallery that, a very small gallery, and it rotated exhibits of Emily Carr works through it. And so I was curating that for a number of years. And towards the end of that time, there's only so many times you can use the same paintings and come up with a different theme. And so what I tried to do is start integrating other artists into that gallery as comparisons or a contrast, contextualizing Carr and the collections. And so I was able to start doing little bits on Sophie Pemberton and other artists as well. So, but she's been an artist that I've been very interested in my whole career, and I haven't really had the opportunity to explore her as much as I felt she needed to be until after I retired. And then I said, okay, this is my first priority is reclaiming this woman's life and seeing what I can do from there. Actually, the story is that they're both Emily Carr and Sophie Pemberton grew up in Victoria at the same time. They attended the same church. They were both interested in art, and they both traveled out of Canada for training, because in those days there was no professional artists working in Victoria. There were some very talented amateur artists, and some of those were women in their social circle that mentored them to a certain extent, but they both had a drive and ambition to learn more. And there was actually a third little girl in Victoria growing up at the same time, and her name was Teresa Wilde. And very little is known about her, and so she's an artist that I'm still working on as well, because there were these three little girls and they all went off to art school, leaving Victoria at a time where it was not the sort of thing that young women did. You really had to convince your family that you were serious, and even if you were serious, they might not have thought that that would lead to a professional career. So it was very strong-minded women working within the means that they had in their social circumstances to follow their dreams. Both Carr and Pemberton were exposed to Impressionistic art in their schooling in England and in France at slightly different times, but overlapping in some cases. And I think they both embraced new ways of seeing. Emily Carr called it a new way of seeing, and Sophie Pemberton also called it a fresh seeing as well. So they were, I think, intrigued by the idea of being able to paint but not necessarily realistically portray. And so they started out with a very academic training, learning in a high realist fashion, as was traditional, but then being the opportunity to explore and to incorporate new styles, which they both did, and they both brought them back to the West Coast. Emily Carr, in 1912, especially after she'd returned from France, went up into the Indigenous communities and was painting there in a new style. And Pemberton, when she came back, one of her infrequent trips back from England, where she actually resided most of the time, she came back to the Victoria scenery and painted landscapes and seascapes in this new style, and had an exhibit actually in London in 1909, and it was all an exhibit of Victoria landscapes, and her intention was to show the light that was so different from that in the old country, and magnificent oil paintings with bright, vivid colors, and very different. I don't think the people in Victoria appreciated them as much as the people perhaps in England did, who were more familiar with that style. It is difficult because you can't record every minute of every day, even though you may know that. Um, so if you're lucky and you have an editor, you can work with the editor, and the editor can say from their viewpoint, not being so enmeshed in the subject, that they can see that there's a route through all of the minutiae of detail. Sometimes it's also just looking for the bigger picture items in a person's life, the traditional sort of stages, marriage or family conflicts or deaths or change of residence, that sort of thing. You can hang a person's life on those aspects of their living, but at the same time, you don't want to lose all the things that make that person special, and those are those little tiny details. And oftentimes, you have to rely on some really good quotes, and if you can find that person's own writing about a particular time in their life, that's, I think, the most poignant, and that's where you start making those editorial decisions. Well, the project I'm working towards now is extending Sophie Pemberton beyond just her life story, but situating her, as I had in my writing already, but more thoroughly, within the milieu of England and France, and the connections she made with fellow students and teachers and people that she knew in England and France, and other Canadians who were there at the same time. And so I'm still adding to this chronology that I've created of her, because there were so many things that I couldn't fit into the writing so far. And so this will allow me an opportunity to explore this other aspect of her life. She had many connections, very interesting women in particular. She was involved in a suffrage movement in England, and that has really not been explored at all. And so I'm working into the suffrage records and her activities in that regard in England, and all of the women that she met through that organization and those activities. And they really add another layer to this woman who really kind of bucked the system and decided she was going to be a professional artist despite her family's misgivings. I mean, they supported her, but they really didn't think she was really as serious as she was. Being able to do an exhibit at the same time as writing a book brings the two together and allows you to have different avenues for incorporating bits of information that don't necessarily fit in one project but fit in the other. And it's always really important when you're writing, especially about an artist, to have as many examples of their work as possible, and to do it in an exhibit form and see the paintings on the wall side by side was just It was just absolutely wonderful. Um, as a researcher, as an art historian, as someone who's seeing this project through, these paintings haven't ever been all together in the same place at once at the same time. And some of them have not been seen for over 100 years. And so to have these available for people to see and for me to appreciate side by side. And so if you got a painting that's 4 feet by 4 feet, it's huge. It's big, and it's right next to something else that's small and delicate and tiny and equally lovely. And so being able to see them side by side um, in their own original state is really important and very satisfying.